It's beautiful outside, isn't it? Except for one thing. It's hot. Too hot. But that's my opinion and not yours. I understand that. It just wasn't fun working in the yard yesterday, but I got it done anyway. But I'm so glad to be here, that's for sure. I'm glad. I always love the Lord's Day. I love being with the Lord's people. I love being with the people of Fairview. It always starts out my week in a very positive note, and I'm very excited about today and all these things, just being with you, worshiping our God. Gives us all good and perfect gifts, and we're grateful to be together today. We're going to continue in our study in the book of Acts, and we are in around verse 15. Paul had just left somewhere. Where did he leave? Anybody can remember? These people were noble. They searched the scriptures to see things that he was saying were so. Thessalonica, but actually it's in Berea. Thessalonica was before Berea, but I tell you what, that was a very good guess, absolutely. And please, keep doing those things, and we learned. But Thessalonica, he had some success, but not all success. But was he successful in the beginning? In the ultimate scheme of things, was Paul successful in Thessalonica? Yes, thank you. Some verbalage here. Vocalize. Yes, talk. Absolutely. Yes, he was successful. And why was that? He planted the seed. There you go. And so he was pretty much ran off from Thessalonica, and then he went to Berea, had a breath of fresh air, because why? Verse 11. They searched the scriptures, and because they searched the scriptures, they can go to where Paul was preaching and where Paul pointed out that Jesus was in fact the Messiah. Does the Old Testament preach anything about Jesus Christ? Absolutely. Absolutely. In the beginning, right? They made man in the image of them, pronouns that represent more than one or plural. Genesis 3:15, his seed or thy seed and her seed. Oh yeah, there's all kinds of teaching and preaching and all that point to Christ. As a matter of fact, everything in the Bible points to him. From the beginning, points to the cross. From the end, points right back to the cross. Absolutely. So yes, they could search the scriptures daily and know the word and know that what Paul is preaching is in fact, hey, all these things did come to pass. Jesus was the Messiah. Therefore, we could believe what Paul preached. Okay, absolutely. So he had success and a breath of fresh air in Berea, but something happened. Oh yeah, those Jews, because of envy, heard what he was doing in Berea, and they come down and they stirred up the people. Okay, so typical. There seems to be a pattern here. Paul goes into a city, he preaches in the synagogue. Some believe and obey, others do not and run him off because of those who did believe. They're losing their following. They're losing their power. And that's the whole point of their envy. It has nothing, well, I guess it absolutely has everything to do with the religion, but everything they've known, grown up, learned, influence here. Now, so they leave Berea, and now he's in another city, one of the major cities of the Roman Empire. Where's that? Oh, that's right. Verse 15. And they conducted Paul, brought him unto Athens, and receiving a commandment unto Silas and Timothy to come to him with all speed, and they departed. Now, while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was stirred in him. Why? That's it. You just read the next phrase. When he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. So his spirit stirred up with him. And I try to make an illustration. I don't guess anybody got the point. But like when I look in my kid's bedroom sometimes, and I look at the disaster, and I'm like, my spirit stirs up in me. But the point I was trying to make is that We're overwhelmed. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We're overwhelmed. You go into a place where you see that a lot of work needs to be done. At first, you're like, how am I going to get this done? And so Paul here, he looks and sees this city. And, Jerusalem, this whole time, or where he's from, they're the people of God. At least they have some kind of code of morality. God has given them a code of morality. Murder has always been wrong. All these things, fornication, shouldn't do it. They knew something about morality. And then he goes and walks into this city, and it's wholly given in idolatry. You have to understand that pagan worship, part of that was a lot of sin. And they thought that was good for their gods. And so he had all these things that he walked into and just noticed, wow, how are we going to do this? Now, how does anybody, by the way, destroy idolatry? How can we destroy idolatry? Yeah, some of you are holding up your Bibles and someone said the truth. Absolutely. The truth is what? God's Word. That's how we destroy it. That's how we destroy the little g gods of today. Are there little g gods of today? Absolutely. Probably not what we're going to read about here today, but there are other instances where people, for instance, let me ask this. What would be some examples of little g gods today? Money, okay. Yes, absolutely. People will devote their lives to gain access or excess of money or cash, and they put that as far as a priority. Anything else? I think that's probably the number one right there is recreation. Because not all of us in here are millionaires, right? Okay. And most of us have accepted that fact, and you know what? I'm not going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be content with what I have, and I'm going to just take care of my family. But other things can be little g gods, and I would say recreation is the biggest killer, because every time something comes up that some people, they will choose the recreation and instead of what they're supposed to be doing. That's their little g god. They don't realize it. Well, hey, I don't worship it. Well, do you? If we devote our lives and give it first priority, do we worship that little g god of recreation? Absolutely. So Jesus, I've heard this in a sermon, and I appreciate it. Dan Winkler is one of my favorite preachers and a great expositor. He said, Jesus is not first in your life. Of course, that got my attention, because guess what we've always heard? Jesus should be first in our lives. You know what he said? Jesus is your life. He is absolutely everything that you are. And so that opened my eyes. He's not first. He is your life. And if he's not our life, then we need to look in a spiritual mirror, don't we? We need to make some corrections because eternity is at stake. And we love him. He loved us. Obviously, he manifested his love toward us, did he not? Leaving a heavenly home and then suffering and then being put to shame on a cross. Why? Why did he do that? He loves us, but what was the significance? We could be saved. That's the number one thing. If he didn't do that, we couldn't be saved. We wouldn't have a Savior, and we wouldn't have access to God. So all these things here. Now, let's move on, verse 17. Therefore disputed he in the synagogue with the Jews, and with the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. So there's his normal routine, goes to a synagogue. Disputed here is a different word than what we think. We think, dispute. What do we think when we think the word dispute or say the word dispute? Discussion here. And he went to the synagogues, but he also went to, this is interesting here because this is a little bit different. He went to the marketplace, right? A marketplace. A marketplace, we would probably see or imagine maybe an area where there's a bunch of people who are maybe conducting transactions or something like that, or shopping or whatnot. It's where people go. I would say shopping malls these days, but that's not really a good illustration anymore, is it? Brick and mortar's pretty much disappeared. Where does everybody hang out now? What do you say? In the living room? Yeah, but where are they in the living room? Yeah, everybody's hanging out on social media now. We're not there in person, but we're there on the internet or whatnot. Some of you are looking around like, I don't do that. Well, that's a good thing. All right, stay away. Well, actually, we're gonna read a little bit about we're gonna read about what Paul said about that as far as places to go, because they did erect buildings in honor for them, absolutely. And so he's going to talk about the unknown God here. But I appreciate you saying that because you would think that they wouldn't, but they absolutely did. So a marketplace here, it's a gathering place. They socialize, but also this is where many philosophers, such as Socrates, he would teach his philosophies there. People will go there to get information, not just to shop or hang out, but they would actually go there to learn. This is where the people are, and where the people are is where we want to teach. This is where we want to give the information. Some philosophers wanted a following, and so they competed with each other, or they talked about each other, discussed things, all these certain things. But you'll read here in verse 18, the certain philosophers of the Epicureans and of the Stoics encountered him, and some said, what will this babbler say? Others, some, he seemeth to be a setter forth of strange little g-gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. All right, let's look at this word babbler here for a second. It comes from a Greek word. It's actually a double Greek word. It's primarily an adjective, but it signifies a crow or some other bird picking up seed, okay? And so metaphorically, it's used as a metaphor, and it's used as a man who picks up scraps of information and then he sells them secondhand, kind of like a plagiarist, or of those who make a show or in unscientific style of knowledge obtained from misunderstandings of lectures, according to my notes here. But they have two philosophers, two groups here that come and notice what Paul is doing. He's preaching Christ in the marketplace where people are, okay, where he can get out the information. Now, I had to do some research here, and I have some notes here about the Epicureans and the Stoics, and it's interesting about their philosophy when it comes to God, okay? First, the Epicureans. In their view, the world was formed by an accidental concourse of atoms and was not in any sense created or even modified by the divinity. Does that make sense? Or does that sound familiar, I should say? Yeah. We have those who are evolutionists, those who believe that, boom, all of a sudden something was created, and through millions and millions of years we have now the earth, and we have people, we have animals, and all this. And it's really just incredible that they would believe something like that. But these people, they said that they professed a certain belief in what were called little g gods, but these were equal to what people's imaginations, to phantoms, impressions on a popular mind, dreams, and there's no objective reality. It's all subjective. And the divinities, or what they say, well, there might be little g gods, but they have absolutely no influence on the physical world or the business of life. Let's see. Also, they believed in animal instincts. Like, men can behave whatever they are feeling is right, whatever their instinct is, okay? The highest aim for them is to gratify or satisfy themselves. This is the Epicureans here. If I see something and I want it, I'm going to get it by any means. There's no standard here. Just incidentally, that's what evolutionists, believe it or not, they believe, or maybe the atheists believe that there is no God. But incidentally, here's a question. If there is no God, how do we know it's wrong, say, to murder somebody? How do we know that it's wrong to steal from somebody? Where did that come from? If we've been here, I say we, generally speaking, if mankind's been on earth for millions of years, and all of a sudden we have evolved to what we are today, where did we get the idea that I can't shoot you or I can't steal from you? It's kind of a hard question to answer, isn't it? They say or may have an idea that, well, through millions of years, they've learned lesson after lesson after lesson and finally developed what they call a human standard. But there is no standard, is there? It's called survival of the fittest, right? If there's no moral standard, I can do whatever I want. Truth would be subjective. What's that mean? Absolutely. What's true for me is different from what's true for you. Okay? I might say, you know what, murder's wrong, but you might say, you know, murder's okay. Who's to argue that? Well, we have a standard. We have God's standard. There's nothing that has evolved in that. So there's a sense or animal instinct for the Epicureans to do what is best for self. It's a selfish kind of philosophy. Now, the other group are the Stoics. They get their name from their founder, Zeno, who taught on a stoa. Does anybody know what a stoa is? A stoa is a painted porch. It's like a big area to where a teacher would stand up or a philosopher would stand up and teach, okay? He taught that God was the soul of the world, or the world was God, that everything was governed by fate to which God himself was subject, all right? They denied the immortality of the soul. They taught that virtue was its own reward and vice is its own punishment. So if good things happen to you, you're rewarded, and if bad things happen to you, you're being punished. Pleasure was no good, and pain was not evil. Stoics were pantheists. Matter was inseparable from the deity. The soul was, in fact, corporeal. The Stoics said that at death it would be burnt or returned to be absorbed in God. Thus, a resurrection, this is important here, a resurrection from the dead in the sense in which the gospel was revealed must have appeared to the Stoics irrational. The proud idea which was set before the disciple of Zeno was a magnanimous self-denial, an austere apathy, untouched by human passion. So God created the world, but he has no care for it. Okay? He created man, and he said, good luck, and then went away. All right? So it's an education of pride, really. It's nothing better than an apprenticeship for death, according to the notes here. But what's interesting here is both of these philosophers went to Paul when they heard him say things. What is this babbler saying? They went to him because they wanted to learn. Okay? This is where people go to learn more information. They were at odds together, but they still wanted to learn something. All right, verse 19. And they took him and brought him unto Areopagus, saying, May we know that this new doctrine whereof thou speakest is? For thou bringest certain strange things to our ears. We would know, therefore, that what these things mean. For all the Athenians and strangers which were there spent their time in nothing else, but either to tell or to hear some what? New thing. Is it really new? Not really. No, from the beginning, right? It's absolutely from the beginning. It's not new, but why is it new for them? They ain't heard it before. That's right. Paul now has an excellent opportunity. He's preaching Christ in the marketplace. Two philosophers go to him and are like, well, we want to hear something new about this. We want to hear something new. And so he gets an opportunity. He gets a group to where he has an opportunity to preach Christ. And then this is where they take him, verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, here's the beginning of his sermon right here. Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too, what's that word say for some of you? Superstitious. But really, that's not like me carrying around a rabbit's foot, okay, or hanging a horseshoe above my front door. Nothing like that. This is actually talking about religion here. I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. Really, I perceive that you are very religious. Now, let me ask you this. Would you consider them religious? Trying to get you to think, and some of you are thinking. I'm not trying to get you a headache, though. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. Hinduism, you got Buddhism, you got Islam, you got all these other religions. They're very religious towards that. McGarvey says this, and I find it very interesting. I can't pronounce all these words. These are Greek words and very compound Greek words. But he said neither of these two is what Paul said, but the term that he employs, saying that he takes it a step further. Paul is referring to there could be worship of demons or of inferior little g gods. You are too religious to these inferior little g gods here. Verse 23, for as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. And I find this interesting. You walk into a city and you have building after building after building that is built in devotion to whatever God there is. And they do this. Why do they do this? Why do they build a building for their little g gods? What's in their mindset? They're a temple, but what do they want to do? That's it. They want to please that God, and then you have somebody that is so nervous about pleasing every single God. Now you have an altar built for what? For who? Just in case there's a God out there that I'm going to... So he talks about, here's an altar here to a God that you don't know. Unknown, by the way, it comes from the Greek word agnostos. Sound familiar in the English? Agnostic, okay? They're not really sure if there is a God, or there's a question about the existence of God. So Paul said that they have seen, or the Grecians had said that Paul seemed to be a setter forth of strange gods, but the gods he was speaking of are who? It's actually one God, but who would he speak of if it were plural? If they think about somebody who worships multiple of gods, you hear Paul preach Jesus. Who else would he also preach? The Godhead, including... Yeah, that's it. Right. So they thought he was speaking of multiple gods, but really he's speaking of the Godhead, the one true God here. And so he's revealing to them the God that they did not know, the unknown. How would you say that? It would be the truth. It would be the truth, okay? That's why I go to y'all who know what you're doing or talking about and ask for advice if I ever need it or want it. Right now I don't need it or want it. Okay? All right. So... But anyway, I'm ignorant. So should I be all angry at you and never talk to you again? Absolutely not. It's not a slander. It's not a slur to anybody. Now you can use it in an ugly tone, but that's a misuse of the word. Okay, I'm ignorant to certain things. Unfortunately, the world, the Greeks here, are ignorant to the Creator. Okay. And that's why you and I need to go out there and preach and talk about how loving our God is, because this world, unfortunately, thanks to some people in the media who represent Christianity, have talked about things that are contrary to God's character, and now the world perceives God in a completely ignorant way, in an unknown way, and so they perceive him as one who is perhaps a tyrant, who will punish you if you're bad, or reward you if you're good in this lifetime. For instance, something hit my house and my house is destroyed. God must think I'm doing something bad. I'm being punished. Is that true? Absolutely not. How do we know that? Well, James teaches us that God is the giver of what? Or James 1, I believe. He's a giver of good and perfect gifts. Those evil things did not come from above. Absolutely not. So we have the world who is, well, not really giving. We can give the Greeks credit here that at least they're giving some kind of reverence to the unknown God, but the world here has no respect for it, or for him. Excuse me. But there you go. I mean, just that's the kind of world we live in. They are ignorant to the kind of God that we worship, the true living God, creator of all things. All right, verse 24. Here he goes. He's continuing in his sermon here. He's going to start saying things that are contrary to the philosophers here. God that made the world, and who would that contradict? The Epicureans, right. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. So he declares, first of all, that God made the world, and the God he was revealing to him, seeing that he's the Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't need what? What does he not need? He doesn't need these buildings. Who wanted to build God a temple in the first place in the Old Testament? Was he allowed to? But somebody said he could. Who told him that he could? Go and do with all that's in thy heart. Anybody remember? He was a prophet. He's the same prophet that said, "Thou art the man." Nathan, that's right. Nathan said, "Hey, I perceive this to be good. Go and do all that's in thine heart." Nathan made a mistake. Who did he forget to go to ask? Exactly. And so it wasn't up to David to build, but rather to who? Who built the first temple? Solomon. All right. Okay. Solomon is David's son. So there you go. He doesn't need temples. He, as a matter of fact, he told David, he said, "Not once have I commanded anybody to build me a house." Not once. Okay? And so God, he is not in need of anything. Look, well, let's read verse 25. It illustrates exactly what I want, the point. "Neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he need anything, seeing he giveth to all a life and breath and all things." God does not need anything that man might offer him. He doesn't. I watched a sermon, or I would say it's a sermon. It was really more of a show. But the preacher comes out, and the first thing he says, "Give God a round of applause." And so it was really awkward because it was a very, and then he goes, "Oh, God deserves more than that. Let's give him a round of applause." And I'm thinking, God doesn't want your round of applause. What does God want? He wants us to love him. He wants us to love him. And so because he wants us to love him, this is what he does. He creates a standard, and then he forces us to do that standard, right? Is that what he does? Free will. I can't force Erica to love me. Okay, I can't do that. Somehow I won her over. All right, somehow. I don't know what I did, but I did it. I'm glad I did it. But I can't force her. Okay. God wants more than anything for us to love him. How do we know that? How do we know that? Oh, yes. From before he spoke the world to existence, he already had a plan ready to go for you and me. Who are we? To him, we're everything. Right? Do what? We're his creation. But I mean, you look back on all the empires and the kings and the evilness, and the kings they're haughty, and they want their way, and they force people to obey their commandments and everything. And then we serve a king who doesn't do that. In fact, what does he do? He didn't come to be ministered to, but what? To be ministered. He's the one to serve us. What kind of king does that? A loving king, the king of kings. Truly remarkable. But I read here also, they built temples. Paul said God doesn't need it. He doesn't need anything that you have to offer him. All he wants is your obedience, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. What's interesting is, how did these idols come to exist in the first place? The man had to go to the woods, cut down a tree, or he had to dig in the dirt, mine some gold. He had to do that, and then he had to fashion a image, and then not only that, he gives that little g god service. All right, he feeds him and satisfies whatever that is. It's just it's nothing. It's material. What's interesting is that God, the Creator, made that material. Okay. Also, what he's saying here is that God doesn't need man, but man needs God. Sense? Okay, he's going to talk about that actually in verse 30. But what's also interesting here is that poverty-stricken idol worshippers have been known to waste their wealth on extravagant temples, images, decorations, and offerings on these little g gods, which are not gods. As a matter of fact, one described a group of people in India who built a temple dedicated to rats. To rats. And they spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to feed the rats. And here we are spending thousands and thousands of dollars to try to get rid of them. I guess we should put them in boxes and mail them over there, right? Well, here's some more. There you go. Hope you're happy. Thank you very much for taking them off our hands. But that's the point there. Man creates an idol, and then he spends all that he has on that idol. The God doesn't need us to do that, right? But we need him. And he blesses us and continues to bless us. It's remarkable. He doesn't need anything. All he wants is our love. And we love him how? Just obeying him. Just do what he says. We will get to the next verse, Lord willing, next week if we can. Are there any more comments? Right. True. Absolutely. She said, very good point. Even in false Christianity, she said it's interesting that we ourselves, generally speaking, have created false leadership or false idols. And those leaders, that brings up another point, those leaders are receiving the offerings of the followers. Okay? By the way, I prayed to God yesterday, and he told me in my dreams that I need a $54 million jet, and he wants you to pay for it. You have to put me in it? I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.